We see a lot of these online leftists, these pundits, I guess if you want to call them that, endlessly bitch about the United States' foreign policies. I know I've done that plenty of times, and that's because there's a lot of stuff that the United States has done and will probably continue to do that is not like super savory from a moral perspective, but it absolutely pales to the kind of human rights abuses that you're going to see when a country like China inevitably, more likely than not, inevitably at least, supersedes the West as the dominant players on the global scene. If not this century, then probably in the next one, just because they've got this really great kind of long-term strategy going on. And I kind of wanted to go through here and enumerate some of the problems that we see with these people that are complaining about, how the US behaves on the world stage, but not how China behaves on the world stage. And it's almost as if, I would say, 20% of the population in the United States would be okay with just handing our empire over to China, which is a terrible idea for a number of reasons, the least of which being, I don't think they comprehend the degree to which domestic life for us would change if we were no longer the global superpower, primarily because a lot of the wealth that we have and a lot of the social programs that enable our society to function in its current form are not possible without being the world's reserve currency. Even in other Western countries that people like to point to as examples of successful socialism would feel the burn because without money from the United States, say, subsidizing their defense budgets, neither would they be allowed to afford these programs, which in the long run would be good, I think, for the culture, because a lot of this stuff that we see with respect to the degeneracy and the moral issues that we're facing home are really enabled by this free-for-all money printing nonsense. So I don't think the two are necessarily mutually exclusive, but it's like, you need to realize what the fuck you're saying, and that your free college, all this free shit you love, it's all going to go away if we're no longer the global superpower and no longer able to use and abuse the, world reserve currency status to sort of finance all these things. So the folks you see online complaining about what the US does, they very, very rarely complain about China. If anything, they like to kind of kiss the boot, not like Beijing Biden, of China, which in Chinese culture, they don't respect weakness. It's probably even worse than it is here with, how if you're weak, you're pathetic and deserve to be crushed. You're not, you don't get respect because, I love the CCP. No, they just, gives them a little bit more pressure when they grind the heel of their boot into your metaphorical face. So it's like, I don't know if these people are retarded or exist solely to criticize the US government because they hate literally everything. I don't know what the fuck's wrong with them, but to point at the problems of US foreign policy when we have the standing that we do and then expect a country like China to not do the same, or probably even worse considering how things are domestically for them, is patently absurd. So I think it just comes from like this, visceral hatred of the country as a whole. And then for all we know, if you've got 2 million spies that have infiltrated the West at all levels, academia, business, law, and everything, is it really that much of a stretch to have, say, 5 or 10 million people just sitting on their computers at home for their meager salary to just go shill online for China? Think about that shit. And it's like, people think nothing of the fact that we had this, the lid blown off this giant scandal with respect to these, the amount and the degree to which these spies have infiltrated physically our countries and nations, not to mention what's online, and they act as if they just didn't even give a shit about it. Like the mainstream media swept it under the rug. I guarantee you, if you go on the streets now and you ask random people, they're gonna have no fucking clue that fundamentally not just their nation, not just their state, but their entire civilization as a whole has been infiltrated by the type of stuff that Joseph McCarthy was warning about back in the 60s with this communist subversion and infiltration. Coming back to the long game strategy that I was talking about China employing, it's much easier to take decades or a generation or two to kind of destroy the cultural basis of a particular nation, thus preventing it from being as powerful as it was from the very inside out, than it is to go on sort of this crazy militaristic campaign. So to touch a little bit more on shills, another term is astroturfing, to where You know, I'm sure our domestic politicians do this as well, but if you're trying to get something going online and you have deep enough pockets, I mean, it would be like me spending $10 million just to get people, just to pay them to share out these videos and stuff. You know, then I'd be kind of like astroturfing myself in that regard. But China's not the only country that does this. You'll notice, like, an example from my personal Facebook is just, you know, almost once or twice a month at the very least, I get a friend request from a girl that looks really cute. I look at her, she's got maybe 2 or 3 mutual friends, and you're scrolling through the feed. It's blatantly obvious that it's a fake account. They do this for all sorts of reasons. I don't know if you guys were aware of the whole e-girl phenomenon, but you could literally, you can be some 35-year-old Nigerian with pictures of a cute girl on your Facebook account, you know, kind of swoon some guys, and they will literally send you money for that sort of thing. So that's kind of like another version of this online fakery that goes on. So like my personal rule is if somebody doesn't have like their picture or their personal name on the Facebook, it's like, it's just bullshit, fuck off. You know, they're cool to have around, but it's like, you know, you really don't know who or what they are at the end of the day. So with that being said, there's no denying that China, of course, I'm sure a bunch of other countries as well, wants to be a world power, and not in the same vein that, say, the British Empire did or the American Empire did, where it's like, you know, the British, they did more to end slavery than most people are aware. A lot of the, you know, imperialistic activities they were engaged in brought a lot of benefit to the countries that were, you know, colonized. They are the only country that I'm aware of that went on a massive imperialistic streak to try and eliminate slavery to the best of their ability. You know, I'm not saying that the United States has been angelic by any stretch of the imagination with its activity since the post-war period, but I can virtually guarantee that whatever we're doing as the world power is nowhere near as bad as what China will do as the world power. I don't think a lot of people realize the kind of working conditions that go on in China, what you can do to people. There are no human rights. There's none of this environmentalism shit, you know. You got your toxic waste dump. As long as you've got the right palm greased and the permission from the CCP, you can do whatever the fuck you want. You know, we hear about suicide nets at Apple's Foxconn factory and think it's kind of funny. Well, it's not very funny at all. And if you think that that's bad now when they're not the global superpower, just imagine what the fuck they're gonna do, you know, to, say, our children and grandchildren, if we're even having any, you know. Sorry, I guess if you don't give a fuck, then whatever, just stop voting or something, right? I mean, and then if you even look at just domestically in America, I mean, there's absolutely no parallel between the abuses that we see from the government to people here in the United States that China does to its people. So it's just kind of banging on that first point of, like, if they're allowed to do this, you know, the world is not going to look anything like it does. And not just with respect to domestic social spending that the US is able to engage in, because it is the, you know, dominant financial power. So what we need to do here in the West is really have a mass awakening, which is, I think, you know, kind of the closest thing we had to that was the popularity of Trump and everything that he was doing in office. You know, is it any coincidence that there's all this Chinese subversion going on and our election was defrauded in the name of this fake virus, essentially, with all the other negative media coverage? I mean, if you have some spare time on a Saturday afternoon, you know, why don't you go look into who owns CNN, who owns MSNBC, who owns Fox News, because they're not innocent in this. You know, Tucker Carlson wasn't exactly riding to the defense of Donald Trump through all of this. And it's like, without somebody like Trump creating the kind of awakening that he did in the United States, it's literally going to be impossible for us to beat or even compete with a country like China. You know, now, and again, suspiciously enough, the strategy is to try and shove all this populism back in the box, make it as racist and nasty and stupid as possible. You know, never mind that the criticisms of populism tend to make zero fucking sense as a whole, and unironically tend to come from the kind of people that will, you know, spend an afternoon criticizing the US government, you know, while they kneel down and try and kiss the boot of Xi Jinping's, you know, Chinese Communist Party. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that's where that whole online shill comes in, because how are you gonna, you know, if there's 10,000 leftists on Twitter that, you know, with their blue hair and they're, you know, looking like fucking retards, obviously, that sort of thing, like, how do you know they're not being sponsored by the Chinese? How do you even know they're real fucking people? I mean, if somebody doesn't come out and make a video like I do you even know if their profile picture is who they are? It could all be fake. This stuff is very easy to systematize, and it's not like, you know, subverting the United States is the only business where that stuff comes into play. Think of it, again, to come back to e-girls. You know, if you're one of these losers that pay online girls for money, first of all, you should be ashamed of yourself and you're really fucking pathetic. But when you're thinking you're talking to this e-girl that's got 80,000, 100,000 followers on OnlyFans or whatever, you're not. You're talking to some guy in the back room, typing away like he's a chick, because when you're thinking you're engaging with the girl, you're going to pay more money because you're getting the attention, which is what you're basically paying for. Again, it's pretty pathetic, but it's not, the political sphere is not the only arena where this sort of fakery is going to go on behind the scenes, effectively duping most people. If you're from the average person, I mean, you're not thinking about all this crazy shit going on with fake profiles and Chinese subversion and shit. And it's like, Trump was the first president in decades that I'm aware of to tackle the deeply unfair trade disparity between China and the United States. That has caused a shitload of problems for them that we're not even allowed to see, because unlike the United States, and this is a strategic weakness of ours, by the way, China is not open at all. They have the great firewall to keep communication just in China, which has the benefit of making it impossible to say, I don't know, spook everybody about some fucking virus that has a less than a 1% mortality rate, So it's like, we can still win, I think, in the long run. But I don't think it's any coincidence at all that Trump did the shit that he was doing, and we saw this ridiculous reaction from the mainstream media, along with, coincidentally, this virus that was hyped up by 10 or 1 or 2 orders of magnitude at least, that just so happened to create an environment where, hey, we just mailed out a shitload of ballots. Wow, how convenient. How fucking convenient. I get that there's not a lot of proof for the sort of things that I'm saying. However, when people who levy that sort of criticism were the same people who were screaming about My Russia or the Mueller probe that after millions of dollars and months and months and months turned up fucking nothing, when that person who is complaining about that comes at me and says, oh, hey, Ian, there's no proof for voter fraud, why don't you stop talking about it? It's kind of like, what are you, fucking stupid? Like, how deeply do you have to pervert the concept of proof, and how much cognitive dissonance do you have to be in order to say some dumb shit like that? So there is, I think we can still win this, but it's not going to be very easy, and a lot of things in the United States need to change. For instance, we don't have a strategy currently to deal with the endless assault on our culture that I think comes from China, fundamentally, or is paid for by China, So think about white people are bad. Obviously, that's bullshit. But if we endlessly promote everywhere possible that white people are bad, well, what does it do? It helps foster, ethnic confrontation in the United States, because we are, unlike China, a very diverse country. It makes a lot of white people, guys especially, with respect to a lot of things about being productive and whatnot, like not even want to engage. We get passed over for job opportunities. And while that sounds fairly innocuous, when you're getting into shit like designing airplanes and now you're not hiring the white guy just because he's white, and you're hiring a less competent black or Hispanic or what have you, we're talking about playing with fucking people's lives. And when you systematically destroy the efficiency and ability of an economy to function correctly just by hiring people that aren't white for the sake of not being white, it's going to cause real fucking problems just on its own. Let's say another thing, antinatalism. I mean, if you're a woman in this country, go ahead and think for a moment about how the United States portrays mothers. They're stupid, they're lazy, they don't do anything. All of these things are clearly false. I mean, you could talk to anybody who's raised children, and sitting under fluorescent lights clattering away on a keyboard for an old white man or Jew is definitely easier than raising children, not to mention the productive output for society. Again, for those at the bottom is much better with intact, strong nuclear families and stay-at-home mothers. Those at the top benefit from things like feminism because it radically decreases the cost of labor and stuff like that. Or look at this transgenderism bullshit. I'm sorry guys, there are only 2 genders. You can dive down whatever subjectivist rabbit hole that you want, but you see how the proliferation of something like subjectivism fundamentally weakens the culture because it erases any firm kind of ground you can stand on. If even the very fundamental basis of your world, which is men and women, is called into question, how can you be strong from there? Ask any of your nihilistic, subjectivist, leftist friends about this infinite regress they get stuck in when they start to question whether or not the very reality around them exists. Again, it comes to this perversion of proof and this level of cognitive dissonance that is impossible to comprehend if you're even remotely normal. And that's just touching on a few of the little things that we've seen pushed like crazy, through the American zeitgeist over the last few years. Let's not forget about the amount of data that Silicon Valley has been selling to China. No shit, they love that. Do you realize, like, your Facebook messages are not all that private? I don't care if you go and set them to that super private secret account, whatever. That shit, that don't matter. Over at Facebook HQ, they got all that shit. So can you imagine if you're the Chinese Communist Party and on every single fucking American that has a Facebook account, you have every single one of their messages? Wow. So it's not like, you're talking to your buddy, you have a falling out and he leaks some shit. It's like, no, that gal you were cheating on your wife with, that shitty business deal you made that you were stupid enough to fucking text about, any other little thing that you put into text that is now stored forever at Facebook, can you imagine if you had that? Like what if I'm, I don't know, let's say I'm DTE and I'm going up against Consumers Energy. Well, let's say I have the CEO of Consumers Energy's Facebook messages that indicate he's having an affair with his wife. Do you think there's going to be a fair struggle or a fair competition if I'm able to throw that in his face and say, hey, motherfucker, you play this smooth, you play this quiet, you don't make it look like you dipped out of this, but if you don't, submit, let's say, to DTE Energy, then guess who's going to know who's cheating on who? So it's, it's pretty fucked up. And to the end of blackmail, let's think about Fang Fang, that whole controversy with that Chinese prostitute that was, fucking her way around West Coast politics. Let's think about the, what was her name? Dianne Feinstein's driver. How many years was she driven around by a Chinese spy? How much sensitive data did he have access to because of that? So it's like when you spend 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years slowly subverting, spying on, sowing the seeds, it's like this is how you destroy an empire. You don't face it on a full-on conflict. We would destroy China, They don't have a navy to get their people over here, whereas we do. So it's like, I get proof, I get thinking correctly, I get looking at all this stuff, but you end up looking like a fucking retard when there are so many coincidences, it literally boggles your mind, and you just, there's no proof, but then we go look back at your Facebook post and who was talking about fucking, Russia and the Mueller probe. To that extent, nobody in the mainstream media, except for, I guess, a little bit of Fox News, but they're controlled opposition, so don't put too much stock in them. Nobody is talking about the degree to which Hunter Biden is compromised. Why? Because Hunter Biden is an important Chinese asset. If the ruling classes of either country have this mutual goal called let's destroy America, if you have something like the son of a president who is so compromised by being a drug addict, sleeping around, taking all this crazy deals with Ukraine and stuff, that gives you a lot of power over the current administration in the United States, which gives you a lot of power over the United States government. So if these people are all kind of in cahoots, it starts to make sense as to why something as egregious as the Hunter Biden scandal is just, pushed under the rug. Fuck it, whatever, who cares? So we have definitely not been innocent in this regard. I mean, the United States, I've got a video I'm working on called What Have We Lost to the Drug War? I mean, the United States has regulated so much. We have taken away so many freedoms from our people. We have done so much damage to the culture just before China was even there to help push us in this direction off a cliff like a bunch of idiot fucking lemmings that it almost boggles the mind. I mean, look at the drug war. A bunch of Fourth Amendment protections were destroyed. Your bodily autonomy was destroyed. It's ridiculous. The government should not in any way, shape, or form be in the business of regulating, what adults put in their body, whether that's for recreation or, thanks to Trump, trying some sort of new medical procedure. We then did the same thing in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks and destroyed a bunch of other privacy protections. And now in the wake of COVID, it makes everything that's happened in the last 80 years look like a fucking cakewalk, because now you can't even go to the store again, without a mask, and soon we're going to see you're not going to be able to do X, Y, Z without the vaccine. So it's not as if we're completely innocent, but in that regard, these are the things we're going to have to tackle in order to become a more virulent culture again and represent a threat to the Chinese as we once did, and otherwise cement like our global status as a superpower, at least for a couple more centuries. So it's like, I don't know. It's pretty sad because we used to have this in the bag. America had one. You look back at the 50s and 60s, the things we were doing, the strength of the nuclear family, the power of the culture, all of that was in the bag. We had that in the bag. And people back then, again, with McCarthyism as an example, saw what was coming. And we see now, 80 years down the road, what has happened. What do we have now? This nation where men and women hate each other. There is no formation of families. The birth rate tanked so much that we had to import literally tens of millions of people from cultures that are not compatible with ours, and unironically push us in a direction that is worse to go in, because, you know, when you import people from Mexico, Central America, Latin America, South America, they're not post-Enlightenment societies. They don't have this focus on small government, liberty, freedoms, and the like that are required to create the wealth to fight something like China from, or someone or an organization like China from becoming the dominant superpower. Now we've basically become this, I don't even like, this self-hating, subjectivist, degenerate, just cesspool of sex and drugs and drag queen story time. Little Timmy's taught he's a girl. We're giving puberty blockers to little kids. I mean, there is some seriously sick shit going on here in the United States. I don't think it's as sick as the stuff that China does to its workers now. Well, it's not a superpower. What it does to its people, I don't know if you guys saw how now they literally have a a government agent that will go around and make sure that you eat all your food at a restaurant. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. So, but yeah, guys. So it's like we can come back with this, but there's going to be a lot of work. A lot of people are going to have to step away from some fairly treasured values, from their easy lifestyles of degeneracy and sleazeballness. It's, you know, pretty fucking disgusting. So I'm 50-50 right now. I think we could come back, but if we don't, it's like, you know, the world's not going to be, especially with the technology we're going to have in the coming centuries, it's not going to be anything like it is today if the United States is not in charge.